Hello and welcome back to the Sydney Dialogue, a world-first summit for emerging, critical and cyber technologies. The inaugural Sydney Dialogue began in November 2021 with keynote addresses from the Prime Minister of Australia, the Prime Minister of India and the former Prime Minister of Japan. It's continued into this year with sessions on Indigenous technology, biotechnology and post-pandemic resilience. I'm delighted to be here today to facilitate our final session as part of the inaugural dialogue. I'm Fergus Hanson and I'm the Director of ASPI's International Cyber Policy Centre and convener of the Sydney Dialogue. The world is undergoing the largest workforce transition since the Industrial Revolution, and the Indo-Pacific is at the epicentre of this shift. Post-pandemic, public and private sector enterprises of all sizes are capitalising on improvements in productivity, efficiency and profitability by accelerating the rate at which they are applying technology to automate and augment work with more machines doing more of the work once done by people. Accelerating progress in AI and automation will be a major growth driver in the coming decade and create opportunities for businesses, the economy and society. It will also create challenges for millions of workers. In this session, our experts will look at where the effects of automation pose the greatest challenges globally and for the Indo-Pacific region. We will discuss how we can ensure career pathways for those displaced to mitigate the risks of civil unrest and ensure that critical skills gaps do not open up and restrict growth in the long term. It's a great honour to be speaking with such an eminent panel today. Thank you all for being here. Let me start by introducing our speakers. Sharan Burrow AC is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, where she represents 200 million workers in 163 countries and territories with 332 national affiliates. The ITUC's primary mission is the promotion and defence of workers' rights and interests through international cooperation between trade unions, global campaigning and advocacy within the major global institutions. Joining us today from Brussels, Sharan is a passionate advocate and campaigner for social justice, women's rights, the environment and labour law reforms, and has led union negotiations on major economic reforms and labour rights campaigns in her home country of Australia and globally. Joining us from India, Dr. Samir Saran is the President of the Observer Research Foundation. His research focuses on issues of global governance, climate change and energy policy, technology and media, and India's foreign policy. He curates the Raisina Dialogue, India's annual flagship platform on geopolitics and geoeconomics, and is the founder of Sci-Fi, India's annual conference on cybersecurity and internet governance. Finally, we have Dr. Sue Keay, founder and chair of Robotics Australia Group and former CEO of the Queensland AI Hub. The Robotics Australia Group was established to facilitate the growth of a sustainable and internationally competitive national robotics industry. Previously, Sue set up the world's first robotics vision research centre, the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision, and led the development of Australia's first robotics roadmap, the Robotics Australia Network and the Queensland Robotics Cluster. A big welcome to our panellists. The Sydney Dialogue is an open discussion which we invite you all to be a part of. If you're on Twitter, you can take part using the hashtag #TheSydneyDialogue. Now, I wanted to start with some of the opportunity presented by automation and AI in the workforce, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And Sue, if it's okay, I might start with you. You've played a leading role in robotics globally. Can you give us a sense of where automation is at when it comes to robots being able to replace workers and what we're likely to see in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's a common misunderstanding that robots are replacements for workers. At the moment, robots are very good at doing particular tasks, but they're not very good at putting all of those tasks together, whereas humans really are champion all-rounders. And I don't think we will get to the stage, and I'm not sure we really need for robots to be able to do everything that humans do. They have quite different capabilities. And I think that would be very unusual for a robot to be able to make a direct replacement of someone's job. But I guess what I'm quite excited about is the potential for these technologies to actually make people's lives easier and to act as tools for people in their jobs. So they have the potential to fundamentally change the type of work that people do, to make jobs more interesting, hopefully to increase standards of living, but also the potential to help people scale solutions to grand challenges that we've been unable to solve with humans alone. And so I think in the next 5 years, that's where we're actually going to start seeing a lot of these technologies taking a much more important role, both in our workplaces, but also more generally in trying to solve issues such as climate change, where, really we just don't have the people power to be able to make, a lot of inroads without some assistance.
Sharan, maybe I could turn to you. You're representing 200 million workers, 163 countries. Sue's talked about robots being potential adjuncts to human workers and providing opportunities that way. Do you see opportunities for workers through this automation and future of work, for example, in humans being able to avoid hazardous and dangerous work, or are there other opportunities that you see?
Well, I agree totally with Sue. In fact, technology's always been part of the evolution of workforces, and to date, we've traditionally used it to upskill workers, to increase wages because of skilled wages associated with the job. And of course, we know that when you have collaborative workplaces where humans are at the centre of problem solving, that is indeed where you're going to get the productivity, because workers can tell you about the challenges of the workplace, about the questions around quality, and many employers who started off with the romance of robotry now understand exactly as Sue says. It's about augmented workforces. It's about the technology that allows workers to actually do their job much easier, much safer. It's more inclusive. If you look at some of the technologies now that enable, diversity, so disabled workers being able to work in manufacturing settings, pretty unheard of, traditionally. But the real challenge for workers is where there is some displacement, and there obviously is and will be, then what's the just transition? It's the same as the climate challenge. What's the transition? How do you make it just? How do you actually build a workplace where humans are at the centre? And frankly, manufacturers know that if humans aren't in control, then they can have all sorts of problems. So the notion that you would have a fully robot or automated workforce is something still of science fiction and should remain there, frankly.
Could I just ask you a chaser on that in terms of the opportunities for trade unions? Do you foresee that there will be an increased drive for workers to join trade unions because of as we start to see automation and robots encroach in the workspace, or is that not going to be a factor in your view?
Well, I think workers are always collaborating in workplaces. And where there's a problem, then people go to those who can solve it. For trade unionists, workers on the floor are the core of their business. So when there's an issue, whether it's health and safety, whether it's wages, whether it's conditions, then unions are always going to be there to help do the job with the workers around what will improve their working lives. And we're now seeing many manufacturers throughout the world. I work with the augmented reality group of the World Economic Forum and advanced manufacturing, and where you're looking at through their eyes at what works, it's about the workforce. If you think about, there's a couple of issues here that are just reality. An older workforce, an aging workforce in manufacturing, people think, well, technology will help us move faster to younger people and to replace people. But what has been discovered is that those people who know manufacturing, know it lock, stock and barrel, are in fact the older workforce. What they don't know is the technology. And that's actually new, scary, can be really off-putting for workers, and change is always difficult. But when you marry an intergenerational workforce and they talk to each other, and so the actual process of manufacturing is understood in its historical form, in its challenges, then you actually get productivity that is real and sustainable.
Samir, maybe I can turn to you. You're sitting in the capital of a country that will soon be the most populous on earth. What opportunity are leaders in India seeing from automation and AI and the vision for the future of work?
So in this age of disagreements, actually, I agree with my panelists. This is based on a study we had done at ORF a few years ago. We had asked 774 enterprises in this country, micro-sized as well as the large corporations that employ more than 25,000 workers. We asked them how do they see the future of work play out. And let me read out. One of the responses was that most companies anticipate job creation and not job loss. In fact, 33% of the corporations believed that this move towards automation, IoT, and other future tech is going to compel them to hire more workforce rather than less. And of course, 19% of certain companies did believe that it would lead to optimization of their staff sizes. Now, that's clearly a story for India. And I do believe that what we have seen play out since this report was published by us corroborates this. We have seen employment in the services sector, especially relating to technology, accelerate in the recent years. In fact, we have seen that to be the bulwark of the economy recovering during the pandemic and post the pandemic. And we continue to see India really thrive in the services ecosystem that is going to be created due to the induction of AI, automation, IoT, and the likes. Now, that's one opportunity. The second opportunity, of course, is that as the pandemic taught us, the work from home is now becoming a reality that no one wants to let go of. Even as the pandemic recedes, we all are more comfortable with this new hybrid or rather convenient workspace environment. And that will allow us to leapfrog some of the social barriers and allow many to participate in the workforce who were left out of it. So I see a whole new cadre of demography participate in this new ecosystem that is going to emerge. Many who were not able to travel to the big cities, women who were not able to always leave their homes because they had other obligations, cultural, social barriers that prevented many from participating. This particular moment allows many more to participate in future tech opportunities. And clearly, I think as the previous panelists mentioned, we have to distinguish between Star Wars and narrow AI. We are at narrow AI, where basically machines are making workplaces less precarious, and that's good. That's a good thing. We should all be striving to make workplaces safer. And machines are making humans more productive and more adept at doing what they were doing. So in that sense, a collaboration of machine with a modestly skilled person in the emerging world allows them to deliver more and gives them perhaps a greater return on their time than they were ever able to get previously. So in a sense, if AI helps someone attain the next level of skills and do work which is more beneficial, it is something that is going to help the developing and the emerging world. I'm not saying there are no challenges, but I guess we'll come to that later.
Great. Well, that's actually a wonderful point, particularly the first point around the survey that you've done, because I was going to pivot now to some of the challenges that we face and what are the biggest risks that lie ahead here. And Sharan, I was going to come to you because there was an ILO report that came out a few years ago, which is an interesting contrast to the report that Samir just referenced. And it was anticipating, I think, that more than half the workforce in 5 large ASEAN countries was at a high risk of displacement due to technology over the next decade or two. So my question was, do you foresee this transition leading to civil unrest as millions of workers are displaced from their jobs? Or is it more along the lines of, as Samir was talking, that this will actually involve more workers, more jobs being created through this process of change? And how do you sort of see this playing out?
You can't look at it as a macro set of data. You have to look at it in the context of what the specific industry is, where it's actually serving a market, and indeed where it's located, to understand what the impact on the workplace is. That's why we talk about just transitions. In the climate context, we talk about employment and climate proofing your workplace or the world of work. It's the same with technology, and they're integrated. The sense of travel, for example, as people travel less, either because they choose to travel less or because indeed their carbon footprint is not is something that the company's conscious of, then remote work will in fact be, it's possible, obviously. We've been now pretty much doing a lot of it for 2 years, but I always thought that manufacturing would be the standout. But when you go onto a factory floor, there are people there, obviously, all the time. But there's a lot of people too who mix work and working from home and so on. So it depends on the workplace, it depends on the product, and it depends on the level of automation versus augmented workforce. But where you actually have increasing productivity because you've got increasing market due to the technological innovation, you'll get more jobs. I mean, it's a demand and supply issue. What we ask is that actually workers are part of the design table, that they're at the table, both giving the company the benefit of their experience and their knowledge about the process, but also being part of the solutions. If there is some displacement, then what happens with older workers? Are they looked after? Do they have secure pensions? You know, if in fact they're younger workers, do they have the skills ladder and the opportunity with income support to actually be reskilled and redeployed? The solutions are there. It's simply about whether or not in the situation, in the workplace, in the context of the industry, people are prepared to really map out what the challenges are, because this is about problem solving. That it all comes back to problem solving, and humans still are at the centre of that. So if we actually talk to each other, we call it social dialogue in international ILO lingo, but if people talk to each other, if you work it out together, if the transition is just and where there is displacement, and there'll be some, we're not walking away from that, there'll be different jobs in different parts of you know, the upstream and downstream processing chains in that industry or in other industries, where you talk to each other, where it's transparent, where the planning is there. I'm not convinced that civil unrest is going to be the major issue. The real question for us is job creation. If we return to full employment and we can show you where you can actually create the jobs across a range of industries, then we will have a future where people feel confident.
And is there an international dimension to this in terms of the just transition? If you've got this issue around, you know, we're in an increasingly nationalistic environment with reshoring of jobs, do you see, you know, jobs potentially being lost in some countries and being, you know, through reshoring being recreated at, you know, maybe in different levels or quantities in other countries? And is that sort of is it an international justice issue that has to be dealt with there as well?
Absolutely. If you go to the global picture beyond the actual workplace and the domestic environment, then if you take onshoring, if you take the advent and the increasing sophistication of simple technologies now like 3D printing, then in fact the supply chains are very different. So while people like me have campaigned against the exploitative nature of low cost, low production, low wage, often unsafe work in supply chains that basically produced product in the developing countries to go to markets in the north, that's shifting dramatically. And the successful companies, if you take a company like Black & Decker, now it's tools, so it's a bit easier, but if you ask the CEO of Black & Decker, Jim will tell you that he's got to produce for the local market or the domestic market everywhere. There are some global elements. If you go to fast fashion, there's no plan. There is absolutely no plan for the fact that maybe not tomorrow, but at some point in the future, I can walk into a corner store perhaps, but certainly a fashion outlet and say, I want that with 4 pockets and 5 stripes and it's reprogrammed. What's the supply chain for that? And people are not mapping that. They're not looking at than what it means in the developing country markets, and there you will find displacement. But that, you know, when you talk to the producers in Bangladesh or in other places, they know the challenges are enormous. One's technology, two's climate, and their use of resources. But again, there are domestic markets, and we say an export market will continue to be part of the future, but don't ignore the potential for both upskilling workers, increasing wages, building domestic economies that will make truly global opportunities become worthwhile for everybody.
Thank you. Samir, you hinted at some of the challenges that you're foreseeing in India in your research. Could you expand on that in terms of what you're seeing as the risks here?
So I think for us, the challenge is not necessarily displacement alone. Just to put it in perspective, we have 200 odd million teenagers currently. So in the next 10 years, we are going to have to create 200 million jobs for these teenagers who are entering the workforce between 1 year and 10 years. Now, that's a task by itself. So I think that the scale of what we need to do and what we need to build up in terms of opportunities is the bigger question. Now, let's start looking for answers. Where are these opportunities going to come from? Are they going to come from traditional manufacturing? Maybe not, because you are going to see specific AI most prevalent in big manufacturing. It is in factories where you're going to see automation most effective in terms of doing specific tasks, replace the humans in the assembly lines and in precarious conditions. And therefore, we are unlikely to build up the opportunities in manufacturing where you're going to see a large prevalence of automation appear. Luckily for us, I think India has built its last 2 decades on services. And we believe, and I'm one of the optimists who sees, that we could actually become the service hub for AI and automation for the world, with the young population, skilled population, adept at technology, adept at creating solutions that are innovative. We could service the global automation ecosystem. And I think that is one large basket of opportunities that emerge. But the challenge is not of just creating jobs, but who are we creating jobs for? And that is the larger question. For example, let me again quote the same survey. Companies are hiring, but not women. Among the surveyed firms, 71% currently employ fewer than 10% female workers, with 30% literally having no female workers at all. 37% of the firms said, and we can safely assume many did not say it because it is politically incorrect to say it, but 37% of the firms said that they don't plan to hire female workers. Now, I think the challenge here is that are the opportunities going to be available to all? And gender is clearly the largest subgroup that we have to cater to. But there are many other sub-identities and subclasses in societies that are going to be excluded as well. So I think the question here is not about opportunities, but about opportunities for all. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is that how is the design of automation unfolding? And I think that is more worrisome. What is AI being designed to largely do? I think Sharan mentioned just transitions, but I think just design is going to be the imperative, because it is too late to catch up with technology. Once technology is so fast moving that societies have been implicated forever before legislation catches up and social sciences do long research and papers on it. So I think it is at the design stage that we now need to start thinking about the purpose of where we are headed. And I would like to just raise 3 points. I see 3 fatal flaws that need to be rectified today. 1, AI and its raw material, which is the data sets. What is designing AI? Is it going to be a Eurocentric AI design that evolves? And is it going to cater to European and transatlantic challenges, old people, safe conditions, etc., etc.? Or are we looking at sustainable solutions for the emerging world? What is AI seeking to do? I think we have to question the design of AI itself. Second, if the largest amount of money that is flowing into AI is from the defense sector, or for the companion sector, or for the assistant sector, then you are designing a particular kind of AI. But if AI is going to solve the health challenges, agriculture challenges, disease challenges, public health challenges, then AI is serving the cause of SDG and just transitions. So again, we need to understand where is the money coming from, because AI is going to do what it is being told to do. And I think, are we telling AI the correct inputs? I think that's the second challenge. And the third and final challenge, of course, is that how do we ensure, and I think this is seminal, how do we ensure that access to AI technologies and services is available to all, and especially to those regions who will need it most? How do we resolve the intellectual property conundrum when it comes to our automated future? Otherwise, we will actually construct this multi-speed world. In the real, when humans were running it, we had recourse to conversations, debates, dialogues, and the UN and other institutions, some which are flailing, some which are failing. If we reach automation, we are going to be coded to have this multi-speed future. And therefore, the access in intellectual property questions around AI become vital for emerging countries such as ours, such as India. Because if we are going to have inferior AI, chances are we are going to have automation and automated societies, or future societies that are going to permanently be classified in a certain future.
That's wonderful. I'll be coming back to you for solutions shortly, so to those conundrums. But Sue, maybe I could turn to you as a robotics expert. What are some of the big risks that you're seeing, and what are some of the things that we're not thinking about as a non-expert community that we should be thinking about when it comes to robotics and artificial intelligence?
I think Samir and Sharan have covered off on most of these. One of the main issues is that, technologies really need to be created that accurately reflect the composition of the societies in which they are used. And nobody could argue that that's actually the case at the moment. A lot of our technologies we're reliant on from one particular geographical region, and in general, particularly in an area like robotics, there is less than 10% participation by women in the field. And I think one of the things that keeps me awake at night, and Samir mentioned this, is really what are the technologies and what are the solutions that we're not even thinking about, because we have such a non-diverse pool of people who are developing those technologies. And so, there are a number of ways that we can try and address biases in the way that these technologies are created. So, we can deliberately try and make sure we program into the technologies so that they are more representative, and we can certainly test the technologies to make sure that as they're being applied, they are not, unfairly discriminating against people. But I don't think that these are standard practices yet at the moment. And so I think we're starting to get to the point where, we really, for these technologies to develop in a healthy and sustainable way, we really need to see a lot more pressure on companies to, for corporate social responsibility standards to apply, really, to make sure that companies are held to account for the type of technologies that they're creating, to make sure that bias isn't creeping into algorithms and having, devastating effects in the way that they're applied. I think this also applies to, how we keep people's data safe. And, I think the government plays a very important role in this too, to ensure that there is enough regulation to ensure compliance, to make sure that we're all safe when these technologies are being applied. And, I think we just have a number of challenges that are going to be coming about. And I agree with Sharan that, we need to have much more dialogue with the people who need to use the technology. I'm really a firm believer, and I think one of the challenges that we have is that in a field like robotics, it's still not very common for people to see a robot on a day-to-day basis, except perhaps for a robot vacuum cleaner. And so people really have very little concept of what both the opportunities and also the limitations of these technologies are. And so I really think we need to be investing some effort into making sure we get these tools into people's hands so they can experiment with them. Because I think one of the main ways that we can actually increase the applicability of these technologies and make sure that they're fit for purpose and to make sure that people aren't being left behind is by actually giving people access. And by doing that, what we usually see is that the users of these technologies will come up with use cases that the developers never even dreamt of. And that can then lead to a whole range of innovations and, I guess, progress towards solving a lot of challenges that the technology creators wouldn't have thought of. And, that makes sense because obviously the people that are creating these things are specialists in doing that, and they don't understand all of the different sectors that these can be applied to. And I guess that is one of the key challenges with AI and automation. It is applied across all sectors. So the people who are creating these technologies can't possibly know the different use cases that they can be applied to. But that doesn't mean that they're not still very useful, but we need to have the domain experts to be looking at how these technologies can be applied. But I think it's also very reassuring for people often to be able to interact with technologies like robotics and really appreciate that, particularly at the moment, they are absolutely no substitute for a human. But until people have that opportunity to have that I guess, one-on-one time with the technology, then it's always going to have a fear factor. And I think that is fundamentally holding us back in terms of our ability to, upskill, our society and our workforce to be able to take on these new technologies.
Did you want to jump in there, Sharan? Sorry.
Well, I just want to say two things. Both Sue and Samir have basically said it in different language. Humans are still in control. The choices you make about the use of technology, the programming of AI, it's still a person or people behind that. Samir said it. He's going to tell the AI what to do. I was sitting here smiling, thinking that's the problem. Why aren't women employed in the workforce? Because we still have men largely designing the AI from traditional manufacturing perspective or indeed other sectors, traditional perspectives. So the discrimination, beyond women, it's also race, it's also indeed disability. But this is about a value set. And what are the underlying values that we ensure, as Sue said, are actually adhered to in all technologies? What's the legislative frame? What's the due diligence? It's no different to any other business practice. But the bit that I really worry about is that, again, Samir raised, is just he said, a multi-speed economy or tiered economy, whatever label you put on it. Nearly 50% of the world's people still don't have access to the internet. That's poverty. In today's world, poverty is poverty, but this actually increases poverty. If you look at the environment where we want to have some sort of globalised world, even if it's operating far more in terms of domestic markets, which are inevitable. I mean, food waste, for example, 45% of our food is wasted. Smart agriculture, smart processing, all of these things can make a difference, but you've got to think locally as much as you have to think globally. And yet, if you do have that exclusion of whole groups of people, even whole nations in some parts of the world, but certainly whole groups of people, even within nations, then the future's going to be even more dystopian than it is today, and that's really frightening.
Thank you, Sharan. I mean, on that ominous note, I was going to turn to you now for some solutions and some ideas for how we can address some of these challenges and deal with some of the problems that you've highlighted. Samir, I was wondering if I could start with you this time. You've articulated several challenges, and I think a really interesting one between not just the problems within the individual technologies and sectors that there might be issues, but the sort of global ramifications of where these companies are focusing their endeavours. I was wondering if you had some ideas around how this might be taken forward in a more constructive way.
So, I have a few thoughts. The first is, and they're possibly unacceptable to most. One is something that I would hashtag as unlevel playing fields. I don't think we need a level playing field. We have to undo a lot of historic wrongs. And right now we need an unlevel playing field, and we have to program for that unlevel playing field. So in some sense, we have to add synthetic data or programming, as Sue was mentioning, to correctify some of the past. So I think the level playing field is not an honest approach to handling future societies. We need unlevel playing fields to correct for the past. And that means if we have to create synthetic data to get certain outcomes, we need to do that. That's the first one. So I think equity has to be unequal for it to be really equal. And that's one concept we need to understand if we have to respond to the automation challenges of the future. The second, of course, is, again, both Sue and Sharan mentioned. Sharan used the word dialoguing. Sue mentioned the engagement between humans and machines. I think the pandemic has given us a few lessons, and I think we should learn them. The most important was that even as we were trying to save our lives from the killer virus, we still put the vaccination programs through 3-stage trials. We did not forego the trial stages even when we were in mortal danger. I don't believe that any automation technology should be allowed to go to commercial scale without sandboxes and regulatory trials. I think the time of cowboy technology capitalism is over. I think it has done tremendous harm to societies. We are polarized, we are constantly fighting, we can't agree on anything because we promoted certain kind of platforms that today have vitiated civil society and civic behavior. I think it is time now for the future tech to be tested through sandboxes and clinical trials, as it were. We have to have test groups before they're allowed into population scale commercial models. And I think that is an important step we need to take now. We cannot believe the benevolence of coders. We must not believe the benevolence of boardrooms, and we must not rely on the benevolence of governments. I think it is time that it is tested. So that's the second idea. The third and important idea for me would be that the golden age of innovation and the golden age of automation can only really be sustainable if it is supported through a golden age of social sciences, humanities. I think we need to ensure that as much as we invest into technology and sciences and STEM, I think we have to invest into social sciences, humanities, and politics. A friend of mine, Maritia Shake, who works on tech, she made an interesting observation at the Raisina Dialogue last year, and she says, people ask political leaders, how much do you know about technology? It is time to ask technologists how much do they know about politics. I think it is equally true the other way around. We need to invest huge amounts into social sciences and thinking about technology and thinking about the social dimensions of technology now, because we are losing the race. We have unfettered tech which is implicating societies all over. So I think the curriculums in technology schools have to change. I think the idea, when I was doing my PhD, we were taught about ethics and engagement with human subjects, etc., etc. I think technologists need to be humanized, and they need to understand that they are really coding our future. They are not coding a bottom line. Right now, the elusive hunt for the unicorn using tech models and workspaces is damaging larger social constructs. And final point, I think automation is going to lead to, as Sue very rightly pointed out, a need for a new dialogue, and this time between humans and machines. There's a new identity discourse in town, and that's between, and let me tell you what I mean by that. It's a few years ago, there was a survey that a huge percentage of users used sexual innuendos, used abusive behavior with their digital assistants. So much of the behavior that had been relegated to the dustbins of history has been mainstreamed back as the conversation with machines have begun, as the workplace ethic changes when you're dealing with your automated assistants. I think we need to have a real conversation on certain digital civics that needs to be inculcated in producing these machines. I think machines should refuse to work for those who use behavior that is unacceptable. So I think the idea that you can speak in because it implicates societies. You cannot be selling a sex robot saying that buy this sex robot because she'll remember your birthday, she will sing you a song, and she will never say no. Now, this is the behavior we fought against for multiple centuries, and now in a box, this is available to a youngster who can buy it off the shelf, and he will believe that this is the commercially desirable outcome he must be searching for in life. So I think machines should refuse to engage with humans who don't agree to certain norms of civic behavior. So I think there are a number of things that I don't want to go on, but I think there's some of the thoughts.
That's wonderful. As somebody who did the classics, I'm particularly fond of the idea of more humanities. Sue, maybe I could turn to you for some of your thoughts on how we take this forward, particularly from an industry perspective.
I'd just like to comment on something Samir has just said. South Korea actually did draft up robot rights, and I think there is a lot to be said for those, because one thing people don't commonly understand is that robots are what we call embodied technology. So we, as humans, respond very different to technology that has a shape and physical form than we do to an iPhone or an iPad. And so it's natural for us to have feelings towards that sort of technology. And so for all of the reasons that Samir just pointed out, and I think that we probably need to consider how we would protect robot rights, because the way that you treat robots really is a reflection of, how you would think about treating other humans. So although, fundamentally I don't think, robots need to be protected, in as much as often they are actually set up to go into unsafe areas to protect humans. But on the other hand, I think by actually having some framework around how we treat robots and what's acceptable is actually quite important in terms of the messaging that we're sending of what's acceptable within our society. So that is something that we need to look at. But in terms of how industry can respond to these things, I think it is a matter of how, once we have these tech companies that are larger than entire, governments, then it is a real challenge about how you can hold them to account and make them more socially responsible. But I think that's where all governments have a role to try and make sure that there are checks and balances in place, and where I would like to see the community well enough informed that they can actually be more active in protesting and actually standing up for the type of technology that they really would like to see used in our communities, rather than at the moment. I think there is a complete imbalance in power where people have to pretty much accept the technology that is available, and if they decide to vote with their feet and not use a particular program, then it has very little impact on the company. And so somehow we do need to redress that power imbalance. I'm not 100%, I don't have the answers for how you do that, but I think until that happens, it's going to be very hard to achieve that goal of seeing a lot of these technologies using for the purpose that, I'm really optimistic that they could be used towards, which is around solving a lot of those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I think one of the most frustrating things for me from having a look, within the industry is, and I think, again, Samir alluded to this, is what are even the challenges that we're looking to solve? Because sometimes they seem as if they're not actually very important, whereas if we could have the community much more engaged in the creation of technology, I would hope that what we would see is a whole range of new technologies that aren't available at the moment that are solving real issues that are facing people on a day-to-day basis. And I think because these technologies are being created by not a very diverse pool of people, unfortunately, we're seeing them only solve a very narrow range of problems.
Sharan, if I could turn to you, we've had two panelists throw up some solutions. Samir, I think, characterises his as potentially unacceptable to lots of people. What are your thoughts on those ideas, and have you got others that you'd suggest to resolve some of these challenges?
Well, yes to testing. First of all, we used to have consumer laws, and if you couldn't put a product on the market if it wasn't safe. And safety encompasses a broad scope of definition. So Samir's right, yes to testing. legislative frameworks for the way in which you are responsible before you get a product to market. And it makes economic sense for companies, and it's secure about encompassing both a safety and a value set. Yes to the humanities. Long time ago, I started adult life as a teacher. And if you look at this set of issues, it's still about problem solving. It's actually still about problem solving. You can't do that just because I can use a technological program or I can code something. You have to be able to, first of all, define what the concept is. Then you have to be able to test it or pilot it. And then, of course, you can look at scale if it passes the test. And this is in a frame that says technology is there for us to use. Humans created technology. It's at our service, not some sort of future technological determinism. That's just ridiculous. And yet we are, as Sue said, falling exactly into that trap. And one of the ways to get out of that is actually, first of all, dialogue with your workforce, but also with your consumers and other stakeholders. And indeed, you know, Sue said if you talk to the community, they'll tell you what the challenges are you need to solve. Let's start doing that, because then we would be building economies. I want to just say something about also the level playing field. I agree with Samir, except there has to be a fair competition floor. And the fair competition floor, and I'm sure he doesn't disagree, has to be based on a value set that goes to human rights, labour rights, inclusion, and, of course, environmental standards. If that's the floor that every commercial operation, every worker, every government actually holds themselves to, then competition is a good thing. Mindless competition sometimes has some difficulties, but competition is part of our world. The final thing I want to say is that there are three things we must do. First of all, it is dialogue, absolutely. The second is we must be transparent, and that goes from what's the problem to what is the process, what's the legislative frame, what's the outcome, and is it evaluated, and what are the grievance mechanisms to effect remedy where we get that wrong. But the really big challenge for us, if we want an inclusive future, whether it's a global market, domestic market, it's shared technology. Our old models of intellectual property are impoverishing all of us. And if vaccine nationalism has taught us anything about the fact that we are not safe as a world, if everyone's not safe, then let's apply that to other lessons around technology and sharing of technology. We will not meet the challenge of the climate emergency if we fail to share technology. We just won't. You won't get the scale, you won't get the cross-learning, and, of course, most problems are both local and global. So I totally agree. This is a very unusual panel because I'm sitting here thinking, I'd love to work with Sue and Samir. Wow, you know, but that is the benefit of talking these things through. No technological future. And one last idea. It's not mine. I wish it was. It's Will.i.am's. He said quite a long time ago, because we sat on the advisory council of the 4th Industrial Relations Centres for the West. That was an interesting challenge. And he said we need an AI constitution. Now, it's not just AI, but that's symbolic for a technological frame. We do need a set of rules, rights. What's the societal frame we want to put on the choices we make about technology, and how do we make sure that humanity is at the core of that?
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I was going to turn now to just one or two questions we've had from people who have written in. The first question, it's from Sunita, and she says it's a government-related question. How can governments better access and leverage the technological advances being made in the private sector so that they are in a better position to readily benefit from and help deploy suitable solutions as we increasingly rely on technology to automate and augment our work?
So, let me try to answer that. I think governments have a very important role. And as Sharan was just mentioning, I think market shaping is one of the most important roles. So I think the largest purpose of governance in the future is going to be to, in many ways, announce the boundary conditions within which technology must engage with social aspirations, individual aspirations, and of course, national aspirations. So the role of governments as curators of our tech future is more important than consumers of the tech future. I think increasingly as technology becomes more pervasive, we are going to see governments having less capabilities to be able to effect a change in our daily requirements. And therefore, it is managing and curating the presence of tech rather than owning or controlling or deploying it that is going to be one important role. The second, of course, is to set the standards. And that's something that we just, whether it's testing, whether it's consumer protection, whether it is creating platforms for dialogues, multi-stakeholder conversations, ensuring that competition and the unlevel playing field can coexist and create opportunities for those who have been underserved in the past. And of course, an international framework so that we don't create different sets across different parts of the world. Since this was since we are talking about the Quad Tech opportunity or the Indo-Pacific or the Asian century or even the Afro-Asian century, I think we need platforms. Perhaps as Sharan espoused, I would suggest that governments of the world must create a standing conference on future tech. Like we discuss and engage on climate every year, we have to do the same on technology on an annual basis. We need a multi-stakeholder standing conference on future technologies where we appraise what has happened in the previous year, where we recalibrate, where we share experiences, and where we are in a constant dialogue. So I think governments have that role. Governments as owners of technology makes me a little uncomfortable because of the nature of the ecosystem I come from. But I'm sure in certain countries that would be a welcome thought as well. For me, I think less government, more governance is possibly the way forward when it comes to future tech.
I'll throw in a second question, and if either Sharan or Sue would like to jump in on the first one, please do. The question's from Erin, and it is increased automation that's leading to the removal of entire classes of work justification for a universal basic income?
Well, I'll take that. Every human being should have indeed a capacity to survive. We call it social protection. And there are standards, there are rules, governance rules, as Samir says. The ILO has a standard around social protection floors, which means everybody should have access to those essential elements that society believes is part and parcel of survival. So, and part of that's income. Other parts relate to health and education and so on. But if you actually say, should every person in the world have a basic income? Well, first of all, it's unaffordable. But secondly, should somebody like me who earns a salary I can live on with, a very comfortable existence, should I get money because I don't need it? That's ridiculous. What we should do, though, is I should be contributing to the people who need it through our taxes, through our, solidarity as citizens with each other. This beggar thy neighbour concept that has really arisen in our selfish societies is just unexplainable. If we make so much wealth, and we do, why are we so reluctant to share it? So yes, the answer is if people need income because they don't have a job or there's a personal or a national or an international shock, that income shouldn't be seen in the derogatory terms it is today of welfare or handouts. It should be seen as an entitlement that humanity believes is absolutely part of our value set. So not for everybody because we don't need it, but definitely for those who need it.
Sue, any thoughts on either question before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I think you can disengage, whether you require universal basic income with technology. They don't need to be related, as I think Sharan has outlined. It just makes sense. So, and I guess in terms of how governments interact with technology and are adopting technology. I do think there is a lot more that governments can do, which would just facilitate good government service provision by being faster adopters of technology. And to do that, I think there really has to be a bit of a reassessment of the way that the governments do their procurement and also how they assess risk, because increasingly as these technologies develop and it is only going to become more rapid, that we need to adjust and be able to find ways that we can incorporate them in business. A government needs to be able to be agile enough to do the same. And I think that, you know, societies miss out when governments are behind the times in the adoption of technology. So, you know, there are still numerous paper-based systems here in Australia which could readily be replaced if we could just find ways to make it easier for government to adopt technology.
And Samir, I saw your hand up.
No, two short points. The first was, this was during the Argentinian G20 presidency. A blue chip economist from the Chicago School was in a room, and he shall not be named. It was Chatham House conversations, and I remember him saying to a large number of people who were in the room that robots can make so much money for us, so much wealth. They can create so much more value. We can be so much more efficient. We can all play golf, and we can all give money to people and give them a basic income to everyone on the planet, because we could have a 9x return on investment if the world was more efficient, and blah, blah, blah. That got me thinking. That's a thought experiment. And to be fair, he was provoking us to think in certain ways. And I was thinking that is the paycheck the only purpose of work and jobs and professions and careers and our engagement with the world? And I realized that actually no. All of us require paychecks, and I completely endorse my panelists that we must ensure lifeline paychecks are available to all. And I think that's something that we must be working towards as an ideal and get to that at the soonest. But we also require purpose, and we also require protection. And I guess the 3P framework is a good way to assess the future of our of work and the future of automation. That is, our automated society is going to give us paychecks. Are they going to allow purpose? And are they going to give us protection? Now, for me, the problem is that if you were to really play golf all day, some people may not like golf. That may not be the purpose they want in their life. You will possibly ask them to go to the adventurous battlefields of Syria and join the ISIS, or to do some other activities. So I think the idea that work is only money is perhaps flawed. I think work has defined our politics, has defined our social arrangements, has defined who we are, our identities. And I think the future of work, therefore, cannot be in the terms of just the paycheck. Yes, a lifeline should be available to all, social protection should be available to all, but purpose has to be created by society. And I fear that somewhere we are losing that sight of purpose when we discuss just paychecks and work and the place of work.
Well, we're coming up to the hour. I think that's a wonderful point to end on. It was a fantastic panel. Sharan, Samir, Sue, thank you so much for giving your time. At different time zones all around the world, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. We really appreciate you joining the Sydney Dialogue. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I wanted to thank you all, especially again for the wonderful and brilliant panel. Thank you to the Sydney Dialogue sponsors, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Meta. And of course, a big thank you to our Sydney Dialogue audience for tuning in. Don't forget, you can continue the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #TheSydneyDialogue. Thank you for joining us.